Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Black History Month Lunch and Learn by the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at the Franklin County Board of Commissioners. We are joined today, by members of the Columbus Metropolitan Library and the YWCA, but I will let them introduce themselves. But thank you for joining us. Nicole, how about we start with you?
Sure. My name is Nicole Sutton. I am the Black Heritage Special Collections Librarian in the Local History and Genealogy Division of the Columbus Metropolitan Library.
Phil?
Hey everyone, so glad to be here and with two of our favorite community partners. My name is Phyl Flanagan. My pronouns are they or she, and I co-manage our Justice, Equity, and Belonging programs at YWCA Columbus.
Well, thank you so much to both of you for being here with us today. In recognition and celebration in honor of Black History Month. I just really admire the work that you do with within your organizations to kind of highlight all the important things about Black History Month or just, Black culture, and especially around Columbus, which is so important. So let's start with, what resources does your organization offer to help people learn Black history? Nicole?
So my role specifically at the library is to highlight the materials that we have in our collection that show the diversity of Columbus, specifically the Black community, and that's within our archival collection and our digital collection. So a few of those ways that we do that all throughout the year are with our partnership with other organizations. One of the ones that I really love talking about is with the King Arts Complex. They have the Photo Morgue, which is all the photographs for one of the Black newspapers here in Columbus called the Columbus Call and Post. And we've been working with them for years to get the images digitized and available online. This is especially important. It's a Black newspaper, so it tells the story of the Black community in a way that other newspapers, local newspapers, don't. But also, the first 8 years of the newspaper's existence, we don't have a record of the newspaper at all. Like, there's no microfilm, there's no physical copies of the newspaper. All we have left are these images. So making sure that we digitize these, get these online for people to see the things that were happening in their community, and also for people to tell us, hey, I know who that person is. I know you don't have the newspaper. I know they aren't identified on that photograph, but I know who they are, so that we can recognize them and make sure that their legacy lives on. So that partnership. We also have a partnership with the Internet Archive, and we were awarded, with that partnership, we were awarded a grant from Clear, and that was for hidden voices, basically, is what the grant was for. And so they're helping us to digitize several of our neighborhood newspapers, and one of those is the Columbus Call and Post. And with that, so the microfilm that we have starting in 72 is being digitized and put online, and I think we have a link that we put in the chat or in the feed so that you can get to those and see those. So again, just being able to see that history and having the story being told from the Black community shares even similar events that might have been reported other places in a different light. So that is really important. And then one other thing that I want to mention, and we'll have plenty of time to talk about other resources from the library, but is the monthly program that I do called the Black Heritage Collection Spotlight. So with those, I bring on a guest from the community every month, and we talk about aspects of Black history in Columbus. And those are either the second or first Tuesday of the month, and those go live at noon on Crowdcast. But you can get to all that from columbuslibrary.org, our website, and just go to events and then virtual events to see when those are coming up. And yeah, they're just really great conversations to learn about Black history. And we use materials from the library's digital collection to guide those conversations. So again, it's another way to highlight those items. And also a lot of our guests are like, hey, you don't have these things, but I've got more pictures and materials to help tell my story or my family's story. Can I have you digitize those? And that's exactly what we want. We want more representation in our collection. So that's a wonderful outcome of those as well. And then also just telling your family story. We have several genealogy tools that you can use through the library as well. So again, if you go to columbuslibrary.org, go to resources, there's African American genealogy tab under resources that you can see all of those too. But I will kick it off to Phyl now.
No, thank you for that, Nicole. And I'm looking forward to engaging in some of the resources that you all have. I have yet to engage to the extent that I would like to. And I think you and I had some similar struggles in trying to decide, okay, what resources do we uplift? Because not only do we have a lot of resources within our organization, but then our partner organizations and other folks that we have learned so much from. But on behalf of YWCA Columbus, I think uplifting our Racial Equity 101 video would be helpful because we are currently providing a BOGO sale. So buy one, get one. And so for those of you who have not engaged in our Racial Equity 101 video, the training video is about 50 minutes long, and it does a great job of providing some historical context, some context that, you know, some of which you may have learned in your formal education, but a lot of it was intentionally withheld from us and really has the capacity to inform how we see race and how we understand racism, and hence how we find our place in disrupting racism and other forms of systemic oppression. And so Perla is going to make sure that you all have access to the links to not only purchase a pass for yourself and a friend to view the Racial Equity 101 video online, but also to register to join us for our culminating community conversation, all based on the content of the video. And so that community conversation is going to be later this month on February 27th, starting at 11:30. So it's a 90-minute conversation, but if you only have an hour to join us, we still would love for you to join us, but you do need to register to join. So if you go to that link and register, then you will then receive your own individual link that you can use to join us on the day of the event. And then there was another, yes, and then beyond Black History Month, we do have an annual event. It was formerly called our 21-day challenge, and it is still 21 days of content around racial justice. We've rebranded it as our Until Justice Just Is campaign. And so for the 4 weeks of that challenge, we will be touching on 4 different topics. And this year's topics center around bodily autonomy, number 2, caregiving, and the interactions with the financial empowerment of women. So just, you know, recognizing that women do a lot of the caregiving, whether that's of children, elders, other folks who need care, and then also gun violence and transportation. And all of these topics are very important in and of themselves, but during this challenge, we will be looking at the intersections of race and racism with each of these topics. And so soon we will, actually registration is open for that challenge. And so please stay tuned. Please feel free to visit our website, ywcacolumbus.org, to stay up to date on our offerings.
Thank you both so much for all of those resources. I'll make sure that they get out to the public, the residents, our staff members, here at the Board of Commissioners, it really is important. I believe that people keep continue engaging, and you guys will agree with me with just some of this information and not just this month. I think like I think a really big part of like about what I want to highlight is the fact that we shouldn't just celebrate Black History this month, but just all year long. You know, Black history is American history, and even though a lot of it has been you know, we've lost a lot of information, right? I think Nicole, you mentioned, you know, the Black Column Post, right? Newspaper, and just trying to salvage all of that information so people learn, like, know more about it. Nicole, is there some like information that you can share with us about like Black history in Columbus?
Yeah, so I think this is a great lead into I know something Phil and I wanted to touch on is the fact that Black history isn't just something that happened in the past and it only has to do with the past. It's still affecting us today. And YWCA Columbus was the organization who worked with Designing the We to bring Undesign the Red Line here to Columbus, which was an interactive exhibit to talk about the effects that redlining had on our community and communities all throughout the United States. But specifically, our exhibit was to talk about Columbus. And I had the good fortune and I'm so grateful that I was asked to be a part of the advisory committee for that initiative. And it is such a great exhibit, and it traveled around Columbus. And for those who maybe don't know, to give some level set, redlining was the practice of actually racially segregating our communities. Again, throughout the United States, this was a federal government implemented program that started in the 1930s. They made maps to say where the safe investments were, and the actual factors that were listed and given for why an area might not be a good investment was infiltration of undesirable neighbors. And those were Black people, those were Irish, those were Italians, those were Jewish people. Like, it was quite literally racial segregation done by our federal government. And we can still see the effects of those maps and what they did to our communities today. Like, the Kirwan Institute at The Ohio State University has done a lot of mapping to show different factors negative factors that you can still see in the same areas where those red areas were, because basically they had blue, green, yellow, and red was the worst investment on those maps. And so that's why they were outlined in red, which is where redlining comes from. And in those areas we can still see that the mortality rates, like life expectancy, is lower, infant mortality rates are higher, just lower opportunities in those areas. Like, we can see all of these factors that are still affecting us today. So that's why I really feel like it's so important for us to talk about Black history. Like you said, Perla, it's our history, it's American history, and just making sure that people understand that what has happened in the past isn't just the past. It still affects us today, and understanding that is so important for us to create a better future together. I'd love to hear Phil talk about their perspective on Undesign the Red Line. It was such a privilege to work with YWCA Columbus, and I'm so grateful for them for bringing Undesign the Red Line to Columbus.
Yes, that was a really meaningful project for our organization, and we appreciated how thirsty the community was for this. You know, shortly after we launched the exhibit, I think it's been about a year and a half now. You know, we had a lot of interest in folks wanting to get a personal tour for their group of the exhibit and really get some more in-depth information about, you know, the city that they live in. So whether they grew up here all of their lives or they are a transplant and really, you know, valuing the history of this, you know, Central Ohio, this place that they now call home. And so I really appreciated not only being able to share some of that information as somewhat of a transplant myself. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, which has its own very similar history. So just recognizing that, the practice of redlining happened in a lot of different cities across the United States and had a very similar impact on families. Generational impacts that are showing up today. And not only are there residual impacts, but there's still harmful policies and practices that are being enacted. And so, in a lot of ways, redlining is still happening, but it may look a little bit different. And then there's things such as snob zoning, which was a term that I just heard about recently, but basically how our zoning practices have been exacerbated, the impact of that redlining. And with Central Ohio being tasked with revisiting our very outdated zoning maps and policies, we have an opportunity to undo some of that harm. But if we are not intentional, then we're just gonna reenact the same harm and continue to be complicit in centering those who have been historically centered. So the folks with the money, right? And then continuing to marginalize the folks who have been historically marginalized and excluded. And so, I love that exhibit has come at a time where we are doing a lot of development in Central Ohio. And I hope that it can continue these conversations so that we can do things differently instead of the same old, right?
Absolutely. I also wanted to say one thing that touches on what Phyl said is I wanted to recognize the Columbus Metropolitan Club because they have held multiple panels on topics like this. They invited me to participate in the redlining panel. They had a snob zoning panel. So thank you to Columbus Metropolitan Club for making sure to highlight these important topics too.
Thank you both for your insights on the redlining aspects of Columbus. As not a native to Columbus either, I've been in the area for about 12 years now, but just having the resources and the knowledge out there for people who, just like myself or who have been natives but don't know it. Once you know it, once you see it, you can't unsee it, right? And it's sad that it's so in your face sometimes, because you have 670, right, or that runs right through the neighborhoods, and it's just um how sad that the city or whenever planning came around, that this happened to our city. And how can we continue, just like Phyl said, just trying to have these practices just leave or have, because they're so outdated and they're so discriminatory and continue marginalizing our communities. I read an article not too long ago, and I tell people this all the time, that Columbus is the second most economically segregated city in the entire country, right? Right behind Austin, Texas. And practices like redlining, or you can see it in parts of the city where you can see the economical segregation and the people who live in those marginalized neighborhoods, who are mostly people of color, Black people, and where are the investments going and how are they helping our community, right? I think that's a big piece of conversation that we need to continue having. Yeah. Well, since we touched on the redlining, and I do want to go back a little, and I want your perspective from both of your organizations and the work that you do in Columbus and here in Franklin County. Why do you think it's important to teach Black history?
I can start because I feel like you were just saying exactly why it's important to teach Black history. It's knowing what has happened. It's recognizing it, and you touched on the highways. I mean, that was a direct result of what had happened with redlining. It's like that area because it was divested in. You know, when I talk about being a bad investment, that means that they would not give mortgages in those areas because they were a bad investment, so that uh, those areas were divested in so that specifically once they had the highway ready to come through, it's like, oh, well, those are bad areas and we might as well just get rid of them. Like they all of these things feed into each other. So understanding this complex history, and I am also a transplant. I am not from even Ohio, so I've lived here for 7 years now, but I learned all of this when I came here, and I think it's so important for everyone to learn about this history and to understand it and understand that this is a diverse place with so many different types of people who have contributed to make Columbus what it is. And if you love Columbus and you appreciate Columbus, I think it's important for you to understand the full history of it. There are so many voices that don't get heard, and you don't understand the full story because you only see it from one perspective. So my goal is just to make sure that people understand that there's a bigger history out there and there are more perspectives and more voices, and I want to uplift those voices. That's my goal.
What Nicole said, no. Pearl, I can't remember if you said this before or after we started recording, but you said Black history is American history, right? And so it's interesting how we've kind of segmented Black history as kind of a separate form of history. And when we think about American history, unfortunately, we think about white American history, which, allows us to have this reverence for our forefathers, right? The folks who drafted our Constitution. But if we are not teaching white American history and just teaching American history, then we can also grapple with the fact that some of the same folks who drafted our Constitution, which included these inalienable rights for every man, that included freedom, also owned hundreds of humans at the same time. And it's important that we grapple with that, right? And not just, pretend that that part didn't happen, which includes, ignoring the real lived experiences of a lot of our neighbors and their ancestors and their descendants. And then it's also important that we all grapple with our racial identities. Another resource that you will find in the linked in the resources is a video called How America Invented Race. And so I think that video does an excellent job of just discussing and sharing what a lot of folks are not aware of, is that race is a construct and was completely invented. And the purpose of that invention was for economic benefit. And the inventors of race are our own government, right? The American government, which was working on behalf of the ruling class, the planter elite, the folks who own the plantations and were making money off of the backs of not just enslaved folks, but also indentured servants. And then came to realize that these indentured servants and enslaved folks who were working side by side on these plantations for a long time were getting disgruntled because they knew that they were being exploited. And so our government, I guess before it was officially the United States of America, so those early colonies in Virginia, to be specific, started codifying in law this racial caste system that then clumped a bunch of darker complected people from a vast part of our globe all into one little category, right? And then another category of lighter complected people into another category. And then hence kind of solidified this caste system that we're still operating in today, right? And so instead of, working side by side on the plantation, we went to Black people being permanently subjugated to the lowest class. And then we had poor white folks that at one point were side by side on the plantation, but now are supervisors or overseers. And then we still have white assigned owning class or ruling class. Today they would be considered, the billionaires, right? The 1% of the 1% who really are pulling the strings behind the scenes. And if we don't have, that critical lens, then we don't know any different. And we just kind of take things at face value. And hence all this anti-wokeness and anti-DEI rhetoric, right? Coming right out of our state house, coming directly from those folks who have historically, wanted to create this division and protect their power and wealth.
I appreciate what you said, Phil, about learning your own, coming to terms with your own identity too. And again, that makes me think of the genealogy aspect of it. I mean, genealogy has a history of like trying to figure out how far away you are from the throne, and that was like the main reason to know like what your genealogy was. But genealogy has turned into something different, and I'm very adamant that genealogy is for everyone. I think it's a wonderful way for people to learn about history from their own family's perspective, because history can feel very disconnected from you because it happened so many years ago. But if you actually trace back your family and you understand their journey and what they went through, you can learn about history, which is important because, again, it's still impacting us today, but from a lens that actually helps you better understand who you are and where you came from, and what sacrifices were made for you to be here. So yeah, just fully understanding that through the lens of genealogy, I think it's a really powerful thing. I've talked to many people who have told me that they felt kind of a sense of emptiness before they really understood like where they came from, and were able to trace their ancestry back and find which tribe they're from in Africa, which country and which tribe, and like that is a difficult thing to do, but my goodness, like it was so special hearing them talk about being able to find that out. And it's just, I don't know, it changed a lot for them. And I love hearing those stories of people just being able to better connect to who they are and where they're from through genealogy. So uh, again, I before I came to the library, I didn't do a lot with genealogy, didn't know a lot about it. It didn't feel like it was for me. So I understand that feeling. And I've done been trying very hard to make sure that people understand that genealogy is for everyone.
And shout out to our ancestors, right? We all have lots of ancestors of all different ethnicities, and that's another thing that makes these racial categories so funny, because in reality we are all multi-ethnic, especially in the year 2024. We've done so much commingling and interacting, despite the U.S. government's very exacting intentions to keep us separate. So whether that was codifying into law, that Black inhabitants and white inhabitants could not marry or procreate together, or if that was codifying into law that Black and white inhabitants, which those in white inhabitants didn't always include, a lot of our immigrant neighbors that will be considered white now. But nonetheless, this legal segregation has caused a lot of harm, has kind of fostered this fear of the other, and it's all been very intentional. But what we see now, the state of the United States, but also the state of our own local community, all of these disparities and outcomes are very intentional, right? Because when we do focus and center those who have been historically centered, so talking about white assigned folks and folks who are the wealthiest among our community members, then that means our outcomes are going to continue to marginalize those who were not centered.
I mean, you both touched on like very important points about, why is it important? And I think that uplifting the voices of the people in the community, especially, or giving a voice to the people who were here before us, who were doing the work in the city, right here in the county. I am so glad that we have at least some like way to do that, right? And to keep those resources alive for people to learn. Because it's, if you have to learn who you are and where you come from, right? I think that's very important for people like you guys mentioned. And it's almost like making a statement, right? You are here. The people who came before you, just like Nicole said, made those sacrifices for you to be here. And what better way to honor and celebrate the work that they have done and who they were here in Columbus or in Franklin County than keeping that history alive and just by being and existing and making sure that, we make a statement by our own existence. So Phyl, you mentioned, go ahead, we're gonna say something, sorry.
You were speaking of resources, and it made me think of our own internal resources. And so, obviously it's important for folks of all ethnicities to learn about the history of our descendants or our ancestors of African descent. But it's also important for us to celebrate ourselves. So those of us who identify as Black or, some kind of hyphen that includes, the African diaspora. It's important that we celebrate ourselves and celebrate our own survival. Like we have been through a lot. The racism that is happening today is real. It's happening on the interpersonal level. It's happening, in our workplaces where, we have to work in order to earn our very basic human needs, right? We have to work in order to maintain shelter, to feed ourselves, to even educate ourselves. And a lot of times we have to work and survive very hostile environments, right? Environments where we are feeling excluded or unsafe, or environments where we're being tokenized and being burdened with doing, extra work, having to be on all the DEI committees, and being, the person who's being called to do all the things right, but then not necessarily making space to rest and celebrate ourselves. And so I want to encourage all of my Black neighbors out there to celebrate yourself, to rest, and just know that you deserve joy and rest. And I'm speaking to myself too, because a lot of times I can feel survivor's remorse almost, because I know that, the sacrifices that my ancestors have made, and the fact that a lot of my community members are suffering the brunt of our systemic oppression that's happening here. Some of them, having dire medical needs and not being able to get the resources they need. That is the story of my family, surviving this medical apartheid, surviving, the ways that our cities are zoned to put, hazardous industries next to Black communities. And so, put that, those hazardous environments along with a lack of access to healthcare, along with just the extra stress of being a Black person, like that takes some extra care and resources. And so I just want to offer that.
You're also saying it to me too, Phyl, so thank you.
And I mean, the numbers don't lie, right? And I think that the data out there just completely proves the fact that there is such a disparity when it comes to, especially like within the Black community, the access to care that they receive, you know, like maternal, uh, and infant like healthcare that they receive versus, other people of color or white counterparts, such big, large gaps of like not good medical care. Um, we actually celebrated, well, we recognized National Black HIV and AIDS Awareness Day last week in a partnership with Equitas, right? Because again, the numbers don't lie. So when you throw in, things like lack of access to care, or just like you said, medical resources, or things like food insecurity, right? If you have this neighborhood that has been sparingly marginalized and you have food deserts and people don't have access to, you know, quality food that will like it's almost like a triple effect, right? Everything is combined, everything is, there's like a pattern and it's intentional. Unfortunately, it is very intentional.
And the sad part is that there is no scarcity of resources. There are plenty of resources. We live in an abundant planet and an abundant community. But unfortunately, the way that we have structured our government and the way that we have developed our our geography, we have done it intentionally to bolster the economics of some folks at the detriment of most of our community members of all ethnicities, right? So we're talking about not just Black people, but our neighbors of all varying complexions, ethnicities, backgrounds, nationalities, you name it.
Yeah. Well, Phil, or I mean, a question for both of you. How do we, and I mean, more like Phil, you are in this space, right? The racial equity, justice, belonging. Um, how do we combat this anti-DEI sentiment as you know, a community or from our own spaces? What can we do to uplift Black voices?
Hmm. I think that most of this work is going to be internal work. So there's a lot of ways that we have all internalized the oppression that we've been swimming in since we were just little lap babies in our parents' arms. And so there's a lot of healing that needs to happen on the individual level as well as on the collective level. And that healing will increase our capacity and will allow us to see things a little bit more clearly because there is a concerted effort to maintain this dominant narrative that marginalized folks are at fault for their own marginalization, right? Instead of thinking about the systemic implications that are impacting like whole communities of folks, we're going to, instead our government wants us to look at individual choices that people are making and blame them for their outcomes. When we know that folks aren't out here making poor choices, they have poor choices. All they have is a bad choice and a worse choice, and they're doing the best they can, right? And so even, the perspective that we take as we're trying to be helpers in the community is important. But first, we have to undo a lot of this internalized racism, and that's going to impact, people of all different complexions. But if we don't do the inner work, then we are going to be very well intentioned, but nonetheless, we're just going to keep perpetuating the same harm that we have endured and had to survive. Oh, and I also want to uplift one of our coalition partners, Honesty for Ohio Education. I have learned so much from them. If it weren't for them, there's no way I could keep up with the nasty anti-DEI, anti-Black, anti-queer, um, anti-education, anti-social emotional development, you name it, coming out of our state house. I mean, it's like spewing out like hot vomit. And you know, it's hard to keep up with, but organizations like Honesty for Ohio Education are uh, working to ensure that the children in our education institutions are feeling safe, are feeling like they can show up wholly, are not being harmed in their schools, and are getting curriculum that represents them in the breadth of the human experience and not just, you know, white American history, which is what we all grew up learning. Like, raise your hand if you know, grew up thinking that Christopher Columbus founded America, and you know, and grew up thinking that you should revere this person, only to find out as an adult that this person was a rapist and you know, a maniac, right? That was out here, you know, murdering indigenous people left and right and just causing all kind of harm. And so that is the risk that we take when we have this very narrow view of history that has been uh, curated by the conquerors, right? Curated by our own government, as opposed to history from the margins, history from the survivors of this empire.
Thanks for sharing that, Phil. I I really appreciate everything that I've learned from YWCA Columbus. Last year, I participated in the YWCA Columbus Kathy Duffy SB Leadership for Social Change program, and I learned many lessons from Phil and from Danielle Boyd and so many others at YWCA Columbus. And you talking about that internal healing, I started to do some of that work that I didn't even know I needed to do, thanks to you and Danielle. So I really appreciate you sharing that here in this. And to answer Perla's question again, my route to social justice and trying to fight against this is through education. Keep that conversation going. Keep it at the top of everyone's mind. Again, we're Black 365. It's not one thing that we're doing in Black History Month, though we do have a lot of wonderful celebrations happening for Black History Month, but it is something that we do all year long and make sure that we keep that conversation happening.
Thank you both for that. I want to touch something that Bill said about, you know, learning from, you know, those who were marginalized, right? Learning from the people who were there. Last year, some members of our team here at the Board of Commissioners and County Administration and Commissioner John O'Grady, we had the marvelous opportunity of taking a civil rights tour down to Alabama. And we visited Selma, Birmingham, Montgomery, and Tuskegee. And we had the opportunity to meet with the people who were like in the movement, you know, women who crossed the Selma Bridge, right? Who were incarcerated, who were, you know, just I still like have struggled to find the words as to how impactful it was as someone who didn't grow up in this country, who learned Black history the way that it is kind of taught here in the States, but even more watered down. And having a son in elementary school, and you know how some like kids are not being taught Black history the way that it was and the way that it, you know, it is. So having the opportunity to sit down with these individuals who were part of the movement, who are still, you know, trying to have people listen to them and to their stories, because that's the only way that is, you know, passed down. And they were so excited to have us there to just share their struggle. And I'm not gonna lie, it was a very heavy trip. And that we still have that conversation in our organization about, you know, we had people from all races there, gender identities, and how we each process that. trip, and how hard it is sometimes to come to terms with what actually happened that you don't know or that you don't learn. Uh, but having taken that trip, it just kind of like reignites in you the sense of wanting to keep the sense of like racial justice alive and social justice. Um, because you know, unfortunately, these people are getting older, and their story, if we don't keep it alive, it's gonna die with them, right? So hence the importance of like having it, resources like the library who, are, continuing that journey and that education. So yeah, very much so. Like,
No, thank you for that. I remember you sharing with me about your trip and the impact that it had, and I'm sure you're going to be unpacking that for the rest of your life.
yeah, definitely.
And I appreciate that you all are learning from activists and people who were resisting, and resisting in all kinds of ways, right? Not everyone is going to be John Lewis, rest his soul, a saint. But we can't all be John Lewis, right? We can't all be, working like he did, from the inside and at the front of the march. But some of us are documenters, right? There were folks that were documenting and making sure that they were sharing about the numbers of Black folks that were being lynched. There were folks that were determined to have some economic security and even some wealth. And how dare they, as a Black woman, a century prior, right? But they dared to, develop their own businesses, or live in ways that were outside of the dominant culture, but true to them. And that took a lot of courage, even more so than today. And so, again, I can't give enough gratitude to our ancestors who were working on our behalf even before we got here. And so, with that gratitude, I'm always thinking and posing the question to other folks, what does it mean for you to be a good ancestor? And even speaking from myself, who I don't plan to have any biological children and don't have any so far. But nonetheless, I want to pay it forward. And I am thinking about the folks that are here with us that are going to inherit this earth after us, and how we can set them up for success and not ruin things too much.
And Perla, I also want to echo that. Thank you so much for sharing that. That trip, I can't even begin to imagine just the impact of that trip and being able to talk to the people who were a part of the movement. I I'm a librarian, and so I'm going to talk about books for a second. But Phil even mentioned John Lewis. So I just finished March, which was John Lewis's graphic novels about his time in the civil rights movement, working with SNCC, and all the way up through the Selma March. So it's 3 books, it's 3 volumes of March, and I just finished it last week, and it's heavy. I mean, just trying to read through that, like the type of graphic, it's a graphic novel, and the type of graphic novel it is, usually I can sit down and read that in a day, but it would take me weeks to get through it because I just had to take breaks because it
Yeah.
was so much. And especially just reading his personal perspective of all of this was just, it was so meaningful. And again, it's another way that you can learn about history from another perspective that helps it makes it more real for you because you're seeing it from that person's perspective and all the people around them and their contributions. So yeah, I highly recommend you can check them out through the library. That's the way I read them. But March, John Lewis's graphic novel series about the civil rights movement in the 60s, and SNCC, and all of the organizations that were working for equality and equity for Black people in the United States. It's a great series, so recommend that.
Yeah, and I like if you or anyone watching has the opportunity to go down, particular to Montgomery, down to go to the Legacy Museum by Brian Stevenson, like his nonprofit, the Equal Justice Initiative. Um, it is really, really powerful, really tragic. Um, they have, this the project, the lynching project, which is like they're trying to, uplift those voices and recognize the people who were lynched, and they have these giant monuments with their names and locations and dates. And it is so surreal and so tragic, but um, it's one of those things where like it's good that it's making you uncomfortable, because then it's stirring something in you that that this is something that shouldn't have happened, should have never happened. And um yeah, very powerful. So if you have the chance, go down to Montgomery for that. I definitely recommend it.
It is definitely on my list.
Hmm.
And I can relate to just like the heaviness, like even doing the work that I do,
Yeah.
like can take its toll, especially since I'm living this work, as an individual, but also a part of a large multi-ethnic family that is being directly impacted by, the current racism. And so I, in some ways, I understand this anti-woke these anti-woke efforts, because like it's kind of painful to be this awake to the harm that is uh historic but also ongoing, but also it's imperative, once you do start to wake up, it is kind of like it's everywhere, but at the same time, like I don't think anyone has ever wished to go back to not knowing, right? Or to that place of ignorance, in regards to whatever event or topic that is, because it is important to have that knowledge, and it will drastically change, and in important ways inform the work that you're doing, and make your work more effective. But it's heavy. It's heavy work.
Yeah, I mean, anytime I talk to a group about Black American genealogy, like I kind of have to set the tone of, hey, we're going to use terms that we don't use anymore, but you're going to see them in the records. We're going to see human beings recorded as property. That's what they were regarded as, and that's going to be really hard. Like, once you know how to find records, like not trying to find like a specific one, but if I just wanted to find any will that had human beings passed down as property. You know how easy that is to do, and how much that hurts to know how easy that is to do. It's yeah, it's heavy, and the work that we do is heavy, but you're right. No, I would never go want to go back to not knowing and not being aware of this. And I hope that others would choose that same knowledge.
Well, to close it down, and we touched a little bit on this, and we mentioned a lot about what motivates you guys to continue doing the work that you do. But do what does Black History Month mean to you?
I can start. Black History Month to me is a month of celebration. Again, I do this work all year long, but we get a specific spotlight in February, and I will take it every time. The library still has several events that are happening this month. Um, on Saturday, we have author Eric Walker coming in to talk about his book, Lost Souls Recovered. And we specifically asked him to come in as a local history and genealogy event because he did genealogy research, and that's what inspired him to write this fiction novel. So it's not a nonfiction, it's not a story of his family, but a story that was inspired by learning his own history. So we want people to see that genealogy, once you've got the names, dates, and places, you can share that in multiple different ways. And one of those ways is by writing a novel about it. So if you want to see that, that's 11 a.m. at the main library downtown on Saturday, February 17th. We also have another program. So we had one earlier in the month, but at the MLK library on Monday. Which is February 19th. Yeah, we'll be having the Columbus Division of Fire come out to talk about early Black firefighters in Columbus. and it was a wonderful program on February 10th, and they're going to do it again. So we're really excited to have them there at the MLK Library. And then we also have a screening of Shutdown, which is a documentary film that executive producer Simone Drake from Ohio State University produced. And it's about the shutdown of the Lyndon McKinley High School during 1971 because of racial tensions that were happening at the school and what the students went through, and just laying out the whole story with interviews with the students. And these screenings are really special because you can ask Simone, whose father was one of the students there at Lyndon McKinley, questions. And sometimes some of the students will come to the screenings and you get to talk to them and hear their firsthand account from them at those screenings. So that's happening at Gahanna on Wednesday of next week at the Gahanna branch. So again, that's that shutdown screening. And then you can also visit columbuslibrary.org/black-history-month to see all the other events that we have going on outside of local history and genealogy. There are many events that are great for family and from all ages. So please be sure to check those out. Thank you.
So many good resources at the library. And I got really excited when you mentioned the project focused on Lyndon McKinley because we've been hosting some internal conversations with the staff at YWCA Columbus around racial equity, specifically for Black History Month, because it's what our mission calls us to do. But one of our staff during the session shared about their experience of integrating Lyndon McKinley and how wild and impactful that experience was for her as a young Black child being bused across the city to another school. But okay, back to Black history. For me, Black History Month is about healing, individual healing and collective healing, and also joy and rest. Beyond it just being a busy time for our program, because a lot of folks want to engage us during February specifically, but it's also a reminder that Black people are deserving of rest and joy, despite what capitalism would like us to believe. And so even for myself as a manager of a program like this, I have to strike my own balance and make sure not to exhaust myself. Not during Black History Month. No, I'm gonna rest.
Well, thank you both for having joined us for this Lunch and Learn in honor of Black History Month. I am so happy that we touch on so many subjects that are so relevant to where we are right now, but also from where we came from. And I invite everyone to engage with the Columbus Metropolitan Library and with the YWCA and all the programs and resources they have. Here at the Board of Commissioners, we will continue celebrating and lifting all Black voices. We understand the importance of it. And so thank you, both of you. And just as a reminder, this has been recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube at the Franklin County Board of Commissioners YouTube page probably by next week. So if you guys wanna, or anyone who may wanna rewatch this conversation, you can find it there. But thank you both.
Thank you.
This was lovely and very nourishing. So
Yeah.
thank you to our partners at the Franklin County Board of Commissioners and Columbus Metropolitan Library for inviting me.
And thank you to YWCA Columbus for joining me for this. And thank you so much, Perla, and the Franklin County Board of Commissioners for inviting us.
Thank you both. Well, have a great day. Let's keep celebrating and uplifting and resting.
Yes,
Important.
take a nap right now.
Right. Well, thank you.